Ghost Ships of the Great Lakes by Dwight Boyer. Chapter 5. Soft brown with a touch of green. The Andaste, viewed from any angle, was scarcely a thing of beauty. Even after she disappeared on Lake Michigan on the night of September 9, 1929, there were few charitable enough to recall any graceful features about her, probably because she had none. She was a working ship, pure and simple. Too small for her times, and trying to make amends for it by accommodating on her deck a grotesque maze of machinery. Big, round, hopper-like loading hatches accepting cargo, a big, clanking, continuous scraper-type device, and a long, mobile conveyor boom unloaded it. The boom was supported, in action, by a tall steel tripod A-frame just aft of her forecastle house. Though they comprised the latest in an efficient self-discharging system, particularly adapted for what had become her standard burden, sand, stone, and gravel. It was supposed to add years to her useful life. Perhaps it did, for the Andaste was still plugging along at her normal 9 miles an hour in her 37th year when the end came. Her charterers and managers pointed out that it was her new self-unloading system, the epitome of proficiency, that made it economically possible to operate her. Others, recalling that a similar rig had been installed on the whaleback steamer Clifton, missing on Lake Huron now for 5 years, hinted that it was the heavy topside gear that killed her. The Andaste was launched from the yard of the Cleveland Shipbuilding Company in 1892, a few days ahead of her sister ship, the Choctaw. As their hull number 16, she slid into the brackish Cuyahoga River, 266 feet long between perpendiculars, with a beam of 38 feet and a molded depth of a little over 22 feet. With a gross tonnage of 1,573, she had a cargo capacity of 3,000 tons and 7 hatches for loading and unloading it. Both vessels were built for and accepted by the Lake Superior Iron Company. At the Andaste's launching ceremonies, her builders furnished marine writers with all the details of her fine engine, a triple expansion masterpiece with a 36-inch stroke that supplied an indicated 900 horsepower and 90 revolutions, Scotch boilers, 11 feet in diameter and 12 feet in length, each with 2 furnaces, produced a working steam pressure of 160 pounds per square inch. These were imposing statistics, but they did nothing to alter her outward appearance. She was not designed to appeal to the aesthetic senses. She was a straight-backed ship, with none of the graceful hull shear of the conventional vessel. From about the waterline when she was loaded, her sides sloped inward. Tumble-home, the sailors called it, a design characteristic more often used on small tankers. They usually have a high trunk running between the after houses and the forecastle house, an arrangement that encloses a myriad of pipes and valves, but also serves to fend off the seas. The Andaste had a flat deck with hatches almost flush with the plating. At the bow, her pie-shaped forecastle house, enclosing the anchor windlass, among other things, was set back from her spar deck, allowing seamen to walk around it to reach the mooring bitts. Engine, navigating house, and crew's quarters were all aft. From afar, if one discounted her unusual bow and noted her extremely modest freeboard, she somewhat resembled one of Alexander McDougall's pig boats or whaleback vessels. She also had all the whaleback's wet deck characteristics in any kind of seaway. Physical appearance was not a factor in the ships operated by the Lake Superior Iron Company. Efficiency and durability were the desired features. For 6 years, the Andaste and Choctaw were the epitome of these virtues, regularly carrying capacity cargoes of iron ore, pig iron, and coal with a minimum of fuss or trouble. In 1898, the company liquidated its marine properties. The sister ships were then acquired by the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company, operators of a vast Great Lakes fleet. Spring of 1899 found them bedecked in the traditional colors of their new owners, black hull with deck houses and Cliffs' distinctive green. The combination did not last long on either ship. The Cleveland Cliffs people were, and still are, fastidious owners, and take great pride in the appearance of their vessels. The tumble-home design of the Andaste and Choctaw led to disturbing problems. Large chunks of iron ore that fell from the unloading buckets crashed down on her sloping sides, leaving scabrous red stains and scars. This could not be tolerated in the Cliffs line, so the hulls were then painted in iron ore red so the stains would not be so objectionable. The Andaste and Choctaw were the only exceptions in history to the Cleveland Cliffs color scheme. Coal, iron ore, and grain, the mainstay of Upper Lakes shipping, were the lot of the Andaste for a long time, and more frequently as the years wore on, cargoes of pig iron. Each season, however, the ship's profits dwindled as newer, bigger, and faster vessels entered the bulk trade. Then, too, by 1920, the pig iron volume had declined alarmingly. But by now the Choctaw had been gone for 4 years, rammed and sunk in 275 feet of water by the Canadian steamer Wakanda in the summer of 1916 on Lake Huron. In an effort to prolong her life by diversifying her port of call potentials, the Andaste went to the shipyards of the Great Lakes Engineering Company at River Rouge, Michigan, in the winter of 1920-21 to be shortened by 24 feet. Her new overall length would permit her to transit the Welland Canal and the small St. Lawrence River canals. For approximately 5 years, she was a familiar sight at Port Colborne, Port Weller, and a score of towns and villages along the St. Lawrence, carrying grain from Buffalo to Montreal. Occasionally, when the need demanded, she loaded coal at Buffalo for delivery at Marquette, Michigan, bringing back pig iron for the Buffalo mills. Whatever the cargo, it was loaded and unloaded under the watchful eyes of her able commander, Captain Milton J. Brown. Despite her new measurements and steady employment, the Andaste's role as a straight-back bulk cargo carrier working in a highly competitive field was but a respite from what appeared to be an inevitable rendezvous with a shipbreaker's yard. In 1925, she was sold to the Cliff L. D. Smith Steamship Company, managed and operated by Latham D. Smith of Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. Albert E. R. Schneider, vessel manager for the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company, also had a substantial share of the investment and her management. Mr. Smith, a shipyard owner, quarry operator, and a yachtsman of vast experience, had designed a self-unloading system for ships, a device that would, theoretically at least, prolong the lives of older and smaller vessels by making them the ultimate in efficiency. Its primary function, as in the case of the giant self-unloaders that ply the lakes today, was that of enabling any such ship to spew out its own cargo anywhere the ship could moor, thus eliminating the need for expensive shoreside unloading equipment. Apparently for tax purposes, the Andaste was registered in 1928 as belonging to the Andaste Steamship Company of Cleveland, but still with Latham Smith and Albert E. R. Schneider as principal shareholders. In the same year, offered as a self-sufficient and going vessel, she was chartered out to the Construction Materials Company of Chicago. They, under the terms of the charter, took over as managers and operators. The Andaste's function, in the Construction Materials Company's formula of operation, was to supply their yard far up the Calumet River in South Chicago with a continuous supply of sand, gravel, and crushed stone, obtained at several Lake Michigan ports, including Mr. Smith's quarry dock at Sturgeon Bay. Not included in any official charter papers, agreements, or conversations was Queenie, a somewhat forlorn-looking, mostly Airedale dog that had become a recent fixture at the Riverside Dock in South Chicago. She had wandered in unannounced one day, timid and obviously in need of food and friends. Softened at first by lunchbox handouts and, as the days wore on, by kindly treatment and more nourishing fare, she had adopted the men and machines as her very own. Almost as soon as the Andaste became a regular caller at the dock, a strong bond of friendship developed between Queenie and Captain Albert L. Anderson, the ship's new skipper. He had wanted to make her the Andaste's mascot, but Queenie turned out not to be a seafaring dog, being afflicted with almost instant seasickness when the deck began to roll in Lake Michigan's chop. From then on, she restricted her visits aboard ship to times when he was securely moored to the dock. The shoreside workers claimed that from a half-dozen different hoots and blasts along the busy river, Queenie could recognize the Andaste's whistle, clamoring for the attention of bridge tenders and careless tug skippers while wending her way upstream. Long before the ship herself hove into view, she was at the dock, registering utter joy in the only way a dog knows, excited barking and a great wagging of the tail. Captain Anderson, as befits the skipper of a working boat, was no fashion plate. He wore what felt comfortable, regardless of the accepted seasons. In mid-August, he accompanied Frank Barrett of the Construction Materials Company on a business trip to downtown Chicago. On the way back, Captain Anderson was struck by the appearance and feel of a straw hat he spotted in a store window. Despite the lateness of the season, he bought it on the spot, discarding his former attire and donning the new skimmer for the trip back to the boat. Queenie met him at the yard gate, whimpering happily, her adoring eyes expressing complete approval. "It was a damned fine hat," Barnett later recalled. "Sort of soft and brown, with a touch of green on the band." On the afternoon of September 9, 1929, the Andaste was at Ferrysburg, Michigan, on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, moored a considerable distance up the Grand River, directly across from Grand Haven, taking on a load of gravel. While the shore staff of the Construction Materials Company's dock directed streams of 2-inch gravel down the loading spouts into the ship's holds, the Andaste's crew were pretty much scattered. Grand Haven and Ferrysburg had always been sailors' towns, in the sense that many of their men were employed on the Great Lakes fleets. Grand Haven was the eastern Lake Michigan terminus of the Grand Trunk and Western Railroad's big car ferries, really huge ships that transported railroad cars across the lake to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Many local men spent their entire working lives in some capacity or other on the car ferries, which operated the year around. Others shipped out on the ships of many fleets during the duration of the coal, iron ore, and rain season, usually from early April until late November or early December. Some of the Andaste's people were from Grand Haven and Ferrysburg. Like most sailors, when their ship touches home port, they beat a path to their own doors, leaving the ship in the care of others with no local ties or responsibilities. The area was also well represented aboard the other vessels supplying the Construction Materials Company with its basic raw materials requirements: the Sandmaster, Sandcraft, the Fred W. Green, and the tugs Liberty and Freedom. That afternoon, Captain Anderson had gone ashore to attend to ship's business, mail a letter to his wife in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, and stretch his legs a bit. During his hours uptown, he encountered and passed the time of day with many friends, some of whom had admired and commented on his new straw hat. It was, some later remembered, sort of soft and brown, with a touch of green on the band. The Andaste's departure time from the upriver Ferrysburg dock that night was not noted, but George Van Arkel of the Grand Haven Coast Guard Station logged her as a passing outbound between the harbor piers at 9:03 p.m. He watched her gradually fade from sight on her normal west-southwest course. It is recorded fact, however, that from the time of Van Arkel's last sighting, the Andaste was never seen again. She just disappeared, utterly and completely. The crew list of the Andaste varied considerably during the season, ranging from 22 to 29. It was at 25 this trip, and but for some strange quirks of fate, would have been 28. Wheelsman Joseph Collins had chosen this lovely September season to lay off for a 2-week vacation. Ernie Casperson, brother of Frank Casperson, another wheelsman, planned to ship out as steward on the Andaste, but personal business prevented his reaching the ship before it sailed. Albert Boyan intended to join his close friend, second mate Joseph J. McCade, as a member of the crew, but could not terminate his previous employment in time to get aboard. On the other hand, fate was outrageously unkind to young Ernie Zeitlow, who shouldn't have been on the ship in any capacity. Only 14, but big for his age, he was shipping out for the first time, courtesy of a recommendation by wheelman Collins. Collins saw him later, before the Andaste sailed, sitting on a stool in the galley, peeling potatoes. "He seemed happy," said Collins. The Andaste, making 4 trips a week from Ferrysburg to South Chicago, normally should have tied up at her Construction Materials Company dock sometime late Tuesday morning. Queenie was watching for her, but the day and all Tuesday night passed without the sound of the gravel carrier's somber whistle hooting its usual challenges to the bridge tenders. By Wednesday morning, Queenie was pacing the dock nervously, whining and whimpering, despite assurances from the yard workers. A sudden shift of wind, followed by a severe northwest gale, developed after the Andaste departed. It had been predicted at the Weather Bureau headquarters, but the information did not reach A.E. Hayer, the local meteorologist, until long after the Andaste had departed the piers, far too late to warn her by posting the gale warning signals at the Coast Guard station. The Grand Haven Daily Tribune had carried only a small notice of small craft warnings in its afternoon edition. The night watch at the Coast Guard station at Holland, Michigan, south of Grand Haven, reported the lights of a ship between 2 and 4 a.m., but saw no flares or signals of distress. Residents of beach cottages just south of Grand Haven, Mr. and Mrs. R.C. Meach and Joan Colliker, told of seeing ship lights about 5 miles offshore between 2 and 4 a.m. on Tuesday. Shortly after 1 a.m. on the morning of Tuesday the 10th, Captain Crawford of the Goodrich Line steamer Alabama was awakened when his ship took 4 bad rolls. He immediately went to the bridge and ordered second mate Henry Erb to hold her into the wind, then blowing at 60 miles per hour. Both the captain and mate saw the lights of another ship to the west and north of the Alabama. The head and range lights told them The distant vessel was westbound, but she did not seem to be moving. There was no indication that she was in trouble or needed help. When the construction materials people finally became aware that one of their ships was missing, they overlooked no avenue of search. They had delayed, understandably, when ill-founded reports from various sources indicated that the Andaste had been sighted in shelter in several places, and one actually said she was on her way up the Calumet River. When it became apparent that none of the reports was based on fact, planes were chartered to augment search aircraft from the Great Lakes Naval Training Station, assigned to scour the southern end of Lake Michigan. A fleet of yachts, a regular flotilla organized by the Chicago Yacht Club to aid seamen in distress, left their moorings on Thursday morning, sweeping east and northeast on the Andaste's course. All ships with wireless were notified to be on the lookout for the gravel carrier or her wreckage. Similar instructions were given to the ships not equipped with wireless at docks all along the lake. From the east shore of Lake Michigan, an armada of Coast Guard craft, fishing tugs, and private boats from Grand Haven, Holland, and Muskegon joined the hunt. The construction materials company's two tugs, Liberty and Freedom, had long since been steaming back and forth, crisscrossing the missing Andaste's usual course. By now, the Grand Haven Daily Tribune had concluded the steamer was lost and announced it with a Thursday afternoon banner headline, Andaste about given up for lost. Later that day, the paper published an extra with an even more sensational banner head, Andaste wreckage is found today. The grim news resulted from a trip Captain George Van Hall, a commercial fisherman from Holland, had made to lift his nets. 11 miles south and west of Holland, the tug, the Bertha G, encountered a vast field of wreckage, some of it entwined in his nets. With his crew of Vernon King, John Anderson, Henry Swatosh, and George Deal, he managed to recover a cabin door, part of a stairway, a section of railing, and a water tank support. Around them, in the welter of debris, 4 by 10 foot strongbacks used to secure the Andaste's hatches tossed in the mooring chop of Lake Michigan. They searched diligently, but they could find no bodies. Back at the Holland Coast Guard dock, company representatives and men who had previously sailed on the Andaste identified the door and strongbacks as being from the ill-fated ship. The people of the Andaste took their time coming ashore. Fittingly enough, Captain Anderson's body was among the first to be found, without a lifebelt or his new hat, but with $479 in his wallet. The others followed, choosing various points along the beach to make their reunion with the land they had left so recently. Altogether, over a period of days, 14 of the Andaste's 25 people were found. 11 wore life preservers. One of them was Fred Ninehouse, who had been a sailor less than a year. Prior to signing on the Andaste, he had helped his father operate the family farm on the shore of the lake, 3 miles north of Ferrisburg. They found him on the beach, arms outstretched towards the farm home in which he had been born. "Poor Fred," said one of the recovery team with a sigh. "Couple of hundred feet more and he would have made it all the way back home." Back in Grand Haven, wheelsman Joseph Collins celebrated his decision to take a vacation as the wisest he had ever made. The subject of newspaper interviews and congratulations from his fellow townspeople, more attention than he had ever held in his life. He celebrated so gloriously, apparently with the help from the juice of fermented grapes, that he was jailed. Held before Justice C.F. Burr, he admitted his guilt and was given a choice of a $30 fine or 15 days in the calaboose. With all of his belongings aboard the sunken Andaste and his current resources strained by the celebrating, he spent one night in jail while friends raised funds for his release. Contrite and subdued, he made amends for his conduct by testifying knowledgeably and freely in the investigation that followed. Nearly always, when a ship sinks or disappears, there are ugly and often unfounded rumors of inadequacies of equipment or dangerous characteristics of the ship herself. With the Andaste, words somehow got about that she was seriously overloaded and that her lifeboat davits were so badly rusted that they were unusable in case of an emergency. Someone suggested that engine failure might have left her helpless in the trial of high seas, where she would have been quickly overwhelmed. This, apparently, was the result of a remark First Mate Charles Brown was said to have made to his wife relative to some engine trouble the Andaste had encountered recently. Another wild tale hinted that sailors had sometimes referred to her as the Black Coffin. In Chicago, Louis Brusek, a former crewman, when queried by reporters, said that the vessel had always had difficulty recruiting a full crew. "She used to pitch and roll so much," he said, "that it was hard to get a crew for her. Seaworthy and all that, but still the boys were afraid of her. There's another thing about that boat. She used to shift her cargo. That means that when she rolled about, the gravel or stone would slide to one side. Many times the crew would have to go down and trim the load even. The rumor started almost as soon as it was known definitively that the Andaste was no more. Nor was there any slackening of gossip when, after the ship had been gone a week, Henry Strabbing and Bartel Hemsk of Holland made a dramatic discovery while searching for bodies along the Holland beach. They picked up a splintered white board, apparently from pilot house or cabin. Penciled on it was a message. "Worst storm I've ever been in. Can't hold up much longer. Hope we're saved." It was signed with the initials ALA, those of Captain Albert L. Anderson. "I have no doubt the message was penciled by the Andaste's skipper," said Gilbert Van Water, coroner of Ottawa County. Others, however, did have doubts, including the local federal steamboat inspectors, Captain Bernard J. Gellick, inspector of hulls, and Hugh P. Mulligan, inspector of boilers. With Bert Gale, vice president of the state bank, William Phillips, deputy customs collector, and E.C. Hurless, clerk of the inspection's office, they conducted an investigation into the matter. "It just doesn't make sense," said Captain Gillick. "A professional seaman such as Captain Anderson would have written in ship's log style, giving the approximate location, time, and the cause of the sinking." Inspector Mulligan agreed. And why, the inspectors asked, had not Captain Anderson, had he wished to leave a message, used the ship's gear provided for such occasions? Every ship, they pointed out, carries in its pilot house or chart room a copper cylinder that is supposed to contain at all times, but never does, a list of all crewmen aboard. To this, a ship's officer, preferably the skipper, is supposed to add the nature of the disaster, the supposed location, and other pertinent information. Cork-lined and with a watertight screw-on lid, it is meant to be thrown into the sea as the ship goes down. Eventually, then, should none survive, the cause of the disaster would become known. The Andaste had such a message case, as testified by Edward Roberts, a workman who had laid linoleum on the ship earlier in the year. He related that he had seen it in the captain's cabin and that Captain Anderson had explained its use, telling him that it was the captain's duty to record the names and addresses of the crew and, if possible, the cause of the ship's foundering, should occasion demand. The message case was never found, although parts of the captain's cabin had washed ashore. It was considered highly unlikely that Captain Anderson could have written the message on the board in the dead of night, with the seas running high and while the Andaste's crew were thrashing about in the water. Without a life preserver, apparently, since none was on him when his body was discovered, he would have been too busy staying alive to take pen in hand, so to speak, to enlighten others via a message written on a board. The board itself bore no evidence of having been in the water for a week, or of being battered by the winds, seas, and sand on the beach. The unusual clarity of the writing precluded that. The inspectors concluded that it was a cruel hoax, perpetrated by parties unknown, impostors who sought only to create a sensation. The inquest into the loss of the Andaste began at 9:30 a.m., about 2 weeks after the disaster, in the supervisor's room of the Ottawa County Courthouse in Holland. It was conducted by Coroner Gilbert Van Water and prosecuting attorney Clarence A. Loker. As is customary, all persons having knowledge of the ship, her cargo, her loading, or her seaworthiness were served subpoenas. They were a goodly number, with ranks swelled by attorneys, the ship's owners, their employees, and marine men from near and far. The testimony was heard by a coroner's jury of 6 Holland businessmen. Specifically, the inquest was conducted in connection with the deaths of Ralph Wiley of Benton Harbor, second engineer of the Andaste, and Captain Charles Brown of Grand Haven, serving as first mate, whose bodies were the first to be recovered. For several hours, the jury listened as representatives of the Construction Materials Company, captains of lake vessels, federal inspectors, and local men who were sailors or who had served on the missing ship, related all they knew about her. Cargo, her life preservers, the lifeboats, her machinery, her handling characteristics, her conduct in a seaway, and the lake weather's conditions on the night of September 9th. Captain Crawford and second mate Earl of the passenger and package freight ship Alabama repeated and corroborated earlier statements as to the severity of the gale that lashed Lake Michigan on the night of September 9th. Captain Crawford also stated that he had sought shelter in Grand Haven Harbor, considering it too dangerous to try to make the piers at Holland or Muskegon, and had arrived in Grand Haven at 4:43 a.m. Meteorologist H.E. Heyer testified to weather conditions that night. A small craft warning had been issued previous to the Andaste's sailing, the northwest storm warning arriving 2 hours after she left port, he said. The barometer had registered 29.04 at 9 p.m. on Monday, the 9th, indicating a storm, but nothing undue. Peter Bowitt, assistant manager of the construction materials company, told of the cargo and how the 1,900-odd tons were loaded by spouts and trimmed. The Andaste's draft, when loading was completed, was 17.6 feet forward and 18 feet aft. It was her lightest load of the season, said Mr. Boat. Anxious to put at rest the rumors of the poor condition of the lifeboat davits, or at least to get to the bottom of the matter, Prosecutor Loker queried those in charge of the regular inspections of steamships. Mr. Mulligan pointed out that earlier in the year, when the Andaste was being towed from her berth, the tug Liberty had overturned, throwing her crew into the water. At that time, he stated, the Andaste's lifeboats were quickly swung out in their davits and lowered several feet as the ship's crew sought to effect a rescue. However, small craft in the vicinity pulled the tugmen out of the water before the Andaste's boats could be launched. Captain Gellick, inspector of hulls, carefully explained his spring inspection of the life-saving equipment, the destruction of 3 life preservers he had condemned, and the renewal of at least 3 more that were not up to standard. When she sailed, he said, the Andaste had 37 first-class life preservers. The lifeboats were personally inspected by Captain Gellick's assistant, Peter Thompson, who found them equipped with 12 Coston lights in an airtight compartment. The lifeboats themselves were almost new, of a type built in Brooklyn, New York in 1926. They were steel, with air bulkheads and regulation rudders and steering oars. It was the considered opinion of many present, including Captain Gellick and Peter Thompson, that had the ship been laboring in the trough of the seas, it would have been almost impossible to launch the lifeboats. Conscious of the engine trouble rumor, Prosecutor Loker sought enlightenment. Before fitting out for her last season, the Andaste had been the subject of a $28,000 mechanical refit at the Johnson Boiler Works in Ferrysburg, at which time she was inspected several times by Mr. Mulligan, as required by federal law. The specific dates were March 1st, 5th, and 12th. In April, he inspected her on the 23rd and 25th. What were your observations on those dates? Asked Loker. I do not know of a more able boat, replied Mulligan. Further inspections of the Andaste were made later in the season, after she was placed in dry dock in Chicago on June 1st for a couple of new hull plates, a refill of the stern bearings, and the replacement of 1 blade of her propeller. In addition to these repairs, the Chicago steamboat inspectors checked her entire hull, rudder, and seacocks before reporting her to be in A1 condition. John Swift, owner of a cottage 9 miles north of the Holland Harbor and south of Grand Haven, told the juryman he was awakened at about 1 a.m. by a terrific wind. He noticed lights of ships seemingly close to shore. He dressed and attended to things about the cottage and retired at about 4 a.m., at which time he still saw the lights. Arising at 6 o'clock, he found no trace of a ship, he said. Questioned as to why he did not notify the Coast Guard station at Holland, he said he thought it would have been ridiculous, as the lights could have been clearly visible to the Coast Guard lookout as himself. He felt, however, that there was trouble of some kind. As to how long a man could live in heavy seas with a life preserver, Captain Gellick said it depended upon the physical condition of the man and his endurance. He gave 14 hours as the usual limit, and cited the experience of a man he knew, the only survivor of a freighter disaster. With unusual endurance, he estimated, a man might remain alive for 24 hours. The construction materials company had been the subject of some harsh criticism early in the hunt for survivors for not reporting the ship overdue sooner. It was felt that perhaps some lives might have been saved had the intensive search been organized as soon as the ship became overdue, instead of waiting almost 2 days. At the time the company was being roundly castigated for its tardiness in reporting the Andaste overdue, R.C. Yeomans, a vice president of the firm, explained to reporters that it was not unusual for the Andaste to be late, especially if she encountered severe weather. They had every confidence in Captain Anderson, he stated emphatically. He cited from memory several occasions when the ship had sought shelter, delaying her arrival at South Chicago and causing some concern to her charterers. The captain, he said, rarely bothered to notify his office. He was content to bring his ship in when weather conditions again were favorable. Such an incident, he related, had taken place the previous fall, in November of 1928. The Andaste had cleared Muskegon from Milwaukee loaded. Shortly after, he ran into a stiff blow and was missing for about 24 hours. Considerable apprehension was felt for her safety. During that period, unfounded reports placed her as far north as Sturgeon Bay. Another official of the construction materials company, R.C. Brinkman, told the jury that he had telephoned the Grand Haven Coast Guard station Tuesday afternoon to see if the Andaste had cleared the port Monday night, as he wished to meet her in Chicago. His calls to his office were there revealed that she had not arrived. Wednesday morning, he conferred with other officials in the Chicago office. They agreed that the boat was lying in somewhere for weather. He had then endeavored to charter a seaplane, but was not successful. Both he and Mr. Yeomans, he testified, made calls to the several Coast Guard stations on both sides of Lake Michigan, inquiring as to the whereabouts of the Andaste. Conflicting reports came in on Wednesday night, he said, that the boat had been sighted. However, on Wednesday afternoon, he chartered a plane and circled the Lower Lake shoreline, at times going out some distance into the lake and landing at Grand Haven at 5:30 that afternoon. Mr. Brinkman said that at no time did he or his associates have any real concern, as Captain Anderson had frequently been overdue. He cited instances of 25 and even 30 hours, when the captain had laid in at some place without reporting to the Grand Haven or Chicago offices. Hence, it was not until Thursday morning that the officers began to be really worried. He told of getting into communication with the Great Lakes Naval Training Station to get the search planes out. He did not, however, make an appeal to the Coast Guard stations. Earlier, while the search for the missing ship and her people was still underway, Joseph Dunleavy, first officer of the steamer City of Grand Rapids, stated that he had seen a ship in mid-lake on Tuesday night, September 10th, with lights resembling those of the Andaste. This was not a subject for discussion at the inquest, since it was considered unlikely that the Andaste would have been afloat in or near the main steamer lanes for a full 24 hours without communicating some kind of distress signal to the many vessels that would have undoubtedly passed near her. True, she had no wireless, but as the inspectors indicated, she had plenty of Coston flares. And since the vessel sighted by First Officer Dunleavy had lights, she was certainly in possession of electrical power and could have signaled with her searchlight. An oar found on the beach was produced and shown to Joseph Collins, the vacationing wheelsman of the vanished ship. He identified it as being a steering oar from one of the lifeboats. Nor did he think it significant that the body of First Mate Charles Brown had been found wearing high rubber boots. There had been some speculation during the period of many rumors that the boots might indicate that at the time of the foundering, First Mate Brown might have been down in the hold with some of the crew trying to trim a shifted cargo. Working in wet gravel, rubber boots would have been the logical attire. He used to wear them all the time, Collins asserted, even on watch in the pilot house if he felt like it. Collins agreed that with Captain Gallick and others that should the Andaste have had the misfortune to fall off into the trail of the seas from whatever cause, it would have been practically impossible to launch the lifeboats. Captain George Van Hall, who had an accurate log of the currents on the day following the disaster and whose fishing tug, the Bertha G, had discovered the first wreckage from the ship, testified it was his opinion that the Andaste sank 20 or 30 miles from shore. Coast Guard officers and Captain Crawford of the Alabama also agreed that the ship did not go down near shore between Grand Haven and Holland. The lights seen and siren whistles that were claimed to have been heard by some on shore, they concurred, were from some other boat. Altogether, 22 witnesses were heard, and although the jurors themselves interjected questions, along with those of Prosecutor Loker and his assistant, J.D. Herder, not a witness could give any opinion as to what had happened to the Andaste. She was simply gone, and that was all there was to it. Mayor E.C. Brooks of Holland, foreman of the jury that consisted of Wyned Werchers, Henry Winters, Fred Beukes, E.B. Stephen, and William Vizers, deliberated somewhat more than an hour before announcing their verdict. It was pretty much what had been expected. That upon the basis of the testimony heard at the inquest, the deceased came to their death by reason of the sinking of the steamer Andaste at an unknown place in Lake Michigan, considerably west of the port of Holland on September 9, 1929. We are convinced that the steamer Andaste was a staunch and seaworthy vessel carefully loaded and prepared for the voyage from Grand Haven to Chicago. The vessel had been carefully inspected by the proper authorities and was fully equipped with lifeboats and life preservers and other apparatus for the safety of human life at sea. We are convinced that officers and men of the Coast Guard stations at Grand Haven and Holland were tireless and unremitting in their efforts to locate men and ship from the moment that the possibility of disaster was communicated from Chicago. We are unable to locate the place of the disaster, the reason for it, nor can we find any trace of laxity on the part of those in charge. The full report was of some length, but more significant than the formal wording, absorbing all concerned of blame, were the three recommendations of the jurymen, all prominent Holland businessmen. 1. that ships the size and nature of the Andaste, even though not carrying passengers, should be equipped with wireless. 2. That the proper authorities should establish on each of the Great Lakes some central marine office, where delay in the arrival of vessels at scheduled ports should be reported. 3. That proper facilities be maintained on each of the lakes for immediate search and rescue of vessels probably in distress. Even before the inquest was called, and while the hunt for the people and wreckage of the Andaste was still underway all along the eastern shoreline of Lake Michigan, the Grand Haven Daily Tribune was announcing her successor, the 6,000-ton steamer Fortuna from Cleveland. The ship had been chartered before the accident to help take care of the unusually heavy demand for building products. She's been secured by the officers of the construction materials company to replace the Long Andaste, and is expected in here Thursday. Another little news item, almost lost in the massive coverage of the disaster, would have been of particular interest to Queenie, still whimpering occasionally and uneasily pacing the South Chicago dock, as if hopeful of at last hearing the hooting of the Andaste's whistle. A yacht, searching on the course normally followed by the Andaste, had recovered a couple of men's hats 30 miles out on the lake. One was sort of soft and brown, with a touch of green on the band. Epilogue. As of the summer of 2020, the wreck of the Andaste has yet to be found. Items that washed ashore from the Andaste, such as this nameplate and lifeboat rudder, are on display at the Holland Museum in Holland, Michigan.